Hi everyone, this is Sarbjeet. Welcome to my channel, Business Analyst in Demand, the hands-on approach to business analysis and none of the textbook stuff. If you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe and the bell icon to get a notification for new content as we create it. Please like this video and leave us comments so we know how to make this content better and better for you guys. Thanks. 4 of Acme Solutions. If you're watching us live on Facebook, and have questions, post them in the comments area. I will get back to them after the training. If you're watching me live in Zoom, you're free to ask me questions while we're going through the program. Again, this is a case study based on popular requests from you guys in the group. We're going through this case study. Typically, lots of business analysts are getting required to present case studies because there's a logical pattern in what we do as business analysts, right? So what we're doing together here is a framework. I'm presenting to you a framework that you can use over and over again in any case study. So hopefully after we're done with this one, we can take a few more. But in the event that we're not able to, I'm giving you a framework which you can follow over and over again. So with that, let's get started. And this week we'll dive into understanding business rules and how they relate into creating our to-be workflows. There will be many case studies that you guys are requested to develop. If you guys understand the framework and understand the process of how I'm going through these steps, then you guys can A, do these case studies on your own, and B, when you land a business analyst position, these are the things that business analysts do on a day-to-day anyway. So if you understand the framework, you will then successfully be able to perform your role as a business analyst. So that is my hope and my goal for these case studies. My experience for 15 years, I've worked for multinational companies. I've worked for, one of the top 50 companies. My training and everything that I cover is hands-on approach in the business analysis industry and not a lot of the technical, because I can only teach you what I know. I can't teach you things that I don't have experience with. And a lot of my training comes from hands-on approach to business analysis. Here it is on the screen for you guys. If this is the first time that you're joining us, there's 3 other training sessions on this case study that I want you guys to go back and review. But at a high level, Acme Systems is requested to build an application, a phone app, a mobile app, to help their cleaning staff, their supervisors and admin with the work of cleaning hotel rooms. So what we've done so far is identify must-haves, right? So our requirements are to build a mobile app for the staff to use, as well as the admins, as well as the supervisors, right? And which will give them access to better scheduling. It'll give them access to understand what rooms have been cleaned, what rooms need, the final approval from the supervisor, and which rooms need to be rated. And then also which rooms are then able to get assigned to incoming guests to the hotel. Anytime you're working as a business analyst, you're touching or you're enhancing IT systems. At least that's what I'm teaching you guys here. There could be business analysts that are doing process re-engineering, meaning they're changing the way things are done process-wise, right? My background is in IT systems, and most of the case studies that we'll do and most of the training that we'll do in here is based on IT systems, okay? When you start any case study or a new project or a new job, these are the things that you need to do logically to complete a successful project, right? You first need to document your assumptions, which are the guardrails, meaning if there are constraints in your project, that goes into your project assumptions. It becomes limiting thing, from a scope standpoint, you can limit your scope. Again, because we're doing this case study and because I don't have experience in the hotel industry, lots of things that we're going to do here are the land of make-believe, because typically when you're working on a project, you have stakeholders to interview and to validate. When we're doing case studies like these, if you don't have industry experience, it's fair to document what your assumptions are from that industry. So that way your interviewer can see the logical approach that you've taken in in the diagrams and in the output that you're creating. Typically, when you start a project or something, you're going to create a diagram called as is workflows, which is done by interviewing your stakeholders, identifying current pain points, and understanding what the expected results are. So typically, when you go into a new job or you're working on a new project, you're not going to go to your stakeholder and say, now we're going to create the as is workflow, right? Your stakeholders typically won't know what that is. What you're going to do is you're going to go to your stakeholders and say, okay, Mr. Joe or Mr. Smith, or whoever you're working with, you're probably working with more than one stakeholders. And in the agile environment, you're typically working with your product owner. You're typically will go to them and say, hey, how are you doing whatever that you're trying to do? How are you doing it today? Help me understand what the end-to-end process is. Where does this thing start? Where does it end? What are the next downstream impacts of this system or this application that you're working with? And what is the end result? Where does it need to end up? So in a series of interview questions, you'll understand and document what it is that they're doing today. And then typically what I recommend is you create something called a workflow diagram. We've created this, I think, in week 2 for our project for this case study that you've understood so far, right? So oftentimes, our stakeholders have an easier time looking at pictures and telling us what's wrong. And that's why we do a lot of diagramming and business analysis to get validation from our stakeholders, right? So typically we'll do something called the as is workflow diagram. Again, a picture representation of how our stakeholders are doing work today. Then what we typically do is move on and create a use case diagram, which are high level features of your project or things that we're going to be implementing for this project, or in our scenario for our case study. You're going to identify business rules. Business rules are like the do's and don'ts of each industry. Each industry has business rules, and we'll talk about them a little bit later today because that's what we're covering today. After that, you're going to create something called a 2B workflow diagram. Again, your stakeholders typically won't know what that means, but it's an output that comes from you guys understanding what it is that your stakeholders are wanting from the project or the output of the project. Again, it's a picture for your stakeholders to look at so they can help you identify if you've missed any processes or gaps within your understanding of the system or what the requirements are. Then you create requirements for future state. If you're working in a waterfall environment, these are your business requirements documents. If you're working in the agile environment, these become your user stories. Then you create prototypes, again, representation, just so you can get feedback from your stakeholders. Prototypes can be very, very high level. Or something we call is low fidelity prototypes, because it's just to get feedback. Finally, in our scenario, we will present this case study to our stakeholders or to our interviewers or whoever is requesting this case study. But in the real world scenario, when you're working as a business analyst, once you have your user stories, you have your prototypes, is when these user stories get handed to your dev teams to start coding. So that, in a nutshell, you guys, is what you would do as a business analyst if you were doing this for your job. So this slide, I think, is extremely helpful. I've thought a lot about this. So what we've covered so far, we've done the intro for the case study. We've documented our assumptions. We created our use case diagram. We completed our as is diagram. And then we also created our product backlog. Today, this week, we're going to attempt to talk about business rules, right? What are business rules? So business rules are rules of the industry. So each industry, regardless of whichever industry you're in, they all have particular business rules. So I've got a lot of healthcare experience, so I always like to give you healthcare examples, or we'll talk about some other industries as well. But in healthcare, typically, if you're going to see a doctor, right, as a physician, you're entitled to only one physical, medical appointment a year. A physical is where you go in and they make sure that, your blood work looks okay, that you haven't gained maybe excessive weight or lost excessive weight. They just want to make sure, typically when you go to your doctor once a year for a physical appointment, that your overall health is okay. right? So everybody is entitled to, based on insurance, one physical medical appointment a year. And from the doctor standpoint, they can only schedule, I think, based on insurance practices or something, they can only schedule one physical appointment. Let's say even if they have 300 patients, or 300 is maybe a little excessive, but let's say if they have a caseload of 50 patients, they can only schedule one physical appointment per day. So based on those 50 patients that they're serving, they can only see one physical medical appointment per their entire shift, which may be 10 hours long, and the rest of the appointments are typically for people that are not feeling well, or things that require more immediate attention. So again, what I'm talking about, what I've just given you, is a business rule for the medical industry, which help us understand what things we need to program around, meaning that if my doctor that is, my primary care doctor, can only see one physical, medical appointment. When I call to make an appointment, right, with the receptionist, they have to see if they can only schedule me in based on when there's availability, right? They can't overlap and schedule two physical medical appointments for my doctor in a given day. So having that rule of only seeing one patient a day in a working shift for a doctor helps the scheduler or the receptionist understand that business rule. And when, let's say, if we were creating a scheduling system for the medical industry, right, we would know that business rule and then already create fail safes, so that way the scheduler doesn't by accident schedule two physical medical appointments for a doctor per day. Based on business rules that we have for the industry, we developed software to make it easy for our end users to follow those business rules. Product owner on this case study said that a cleaning person can only be assigned to clean 5 rooms in a day. That becomes our business rule, because when we're writing requirements for our schedulers, we have to make sure that our admin or our supervisor isn't assigning more than 6 rooms to a particular cleaning staff person. Jot that down, because that is our business rule. So 5 or less rooms assigned per shift or per day. Admin review required for assigning, right, for guest. And so that means that they're going to clean the room thoroughly if only one time before the guest checks in. Every other time, like every day, they would just go in and per day. So that means that every day the cleaning staff is going to go in and make the beds and clean out the trash and do the basic cleaning every day, right? So there's deep cleaning when somebody checks out of the hotel, and they're changing the sheets, and they're putting in new towels and everything, and cleaning the toilets and everything. So that's called deep cleaning. And then daily cleaning is when they're just going in and making the beds and making sure that everything looks a little organized. So I think this is enough for business rules for now, for what we're creating.
But suddenly there's one question in one of the interview. They said that in Agile, why do you make use cases if there's a user story?
So use
So
cases and user stories are completely two different things, right? So use cases are used to identify high level functionality of your systems that typically is in the beginning of the project, to create the
okay,
product backlog like we did last time. So user stories are the features that you will be working with your developers and your product owner to develop, right? Something called MVP.
it's like so whether so I mean use cases are use can be used even the project is Agile. It can be used. It is
Yeah.
not a rule that so it is, we can't say that in Agile we don't use cases.
The type
Yeah,
of project that you're working on, waterfall or agile or anything.
it's a tool use.
User stories are specifically for agile, and they're similar to requirements. So you have something called a BRD in the waterfall, where you develop the entire BRD before you start coding a project. But in agile, you take user stories. So you take minimal viable product,
Yeah, yeah.
many chunks of software that needs to be developed first. You work on it. So user stories are similar to what you would have in your business requirements document in the waterfall.
Okay.
Business Analyst in Demand. Again, Facebook group Business Analyst in Demand to join me during these live training sessions. Again, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, hit subscribe and click on the bell icon to get notifications for new content as we post it. Thanks.